Tonight, Bill Gill reports on a presidential news conference. Senator Edward Kennedy evokes memory of brothers in sharp attack on Wallace. Steve Huss reports on California police breaking up a student barricade. Jules Bergman with film taken aboard the Apollo 7 spacecraft. And guest commentator James J. Kilpatrick offers his view of the ideal president. Now, here is Frank Reynolds.
President Johnson said today there has been no basic change, no breakthrough in the negotiations in Paris. The president met with reporters for the first time since the latest flurry of peace rumors. ABC White House correspondent Bill Gill reports.
News Secretary George Christian had made the same statement 1 week ago. Today, the president tried to discourage speculation on a possible bombing halt while avoiding any firm denial that new proposals had been given Hanoi.
The statement Mr. Christian issued is accurate at that time and is accurate now. We want peace very much. We've been doing all we could for several months to try to bring about some kind of an understanding that would result in substantive discussions and ultimate settlement of the Southeast Asia problem. We do not want to make news until there is news, and we realize that many times diplomacy can be more effective in private than to have all your discussions and recommendations, prophecies carried in the press.
The president was asked to appraise the apparent and recent lull in enemy attacks throughout South Vietnam.
I am hesitant to, from this distant point, to use this much overworked word lull. When 1,500 people give their lives in 1 week, some places there's not a lull. And the last thing I would want to do is to lull anyone into a false sense of security. So we're working very hard and very diligently and very earnestly, and the only thing I can say to you is that I think the decision of March 31st was indicated, was justified, and I'm more pleased by it every hour that goes by.
That decision was the most difficult of his lifetime. The decision to leave the presidency in a search for peace. This is Bill Gill, ABC News, Washington.
The United States Command in Saigon reported today that 100 Americans were killed in combat last week. Now, that's the lowest weekly toll in 14 months. 589 Americans were wounded. 132 South Vietnamese troops were killed, and Allied sources estimate the enemy dead at 1,243. Again today, there was little ground fighting, but as in the past 2 days, I should say, 7 American aircraft have been shot down over South Vietnam with the loss of 5 lives. American fighter bombers again today were out over the southern area of North Vietnam in force. In a moment, Senator Edward Kennedy on George Wallace.
To prove Playtex living bras have the lovely look you can't wash out, this hospital laundry washed them under the toughest laundry conditions in hospital detergent and bleach. Even after 50 machine washings, these bras still stretch like new. Side stretch this way, every way. And how do Playtex bras feel? The nurses who wore them say,
"Mine's really comfortable. Mine still fits like new."
For the lovely look you can't wash out, Playtex living bras.
Hello.
Mr. Snitzer, what is your opinion about...
How do you do?
Nice to see you. Mrs. Snitzer, how do you feel after the strenuous campaigning?
My girdle is killing me.
Excuses.
She needs the new 18-hour girdle by Playtex. It's made from a remarkable new fabric Playtex just invented. A delicate webbing with the strength to hold you firm all day. The first phone control girdle that's comfortable for hours. The new 18-hour girdle by Playtex.
President Johnson told his news conference today he does not believe the presidential election will be decided by the House of Representatives. That is a possibility because George Wallace could possibly prevent either Vice President Humphrey or Richard Nixon from winning a majority of the Electoral College votes. The president said, "I think Mr. Humphrey in the days ahead will eliminate the necessity of the House making any judgment on the election." But Democrats, and for that matter Republicans, are plainly concerned about the size of the Wallace vote. Today in New Bedford, Massachusetts, Senator Edward Kennedy invoked the memory of his brothers in a plea to voters to repudiate George Wallace.
I know the kind of citizens who are considering voting for the third party. They do not hate their fellow Americans. They do not want to tear down the Constitution. They do not want extremists choosing our president. They are decent people who believe in America and want to make it better. But they have been misled into thinking that because the party cannot win the election, support would be a harmless way of showing their dissatisfaction with current conditions. Nothing could be further from the truth. A significant vote this year would turn this movement into a permanent party of division and hate, seeking to elect mayors and congressmen as well as presidents. It would lift the haters and the wreckers to positions of formidable influence in our country. The force of suspicion and repression, encouraged by this mandate, could attack our institutions and restrict our liberties. The result would be more division than any amount of goodwill could bridge, and more violence than any number of police could control. And so I want to say to those who lean towards the third party candidate, especially to those among them who voted for President Kennedy and supported Robert Kennedy, that nothing could be further from the principles of these two men. President Kennedy upheld the Constitution and the laws of the United States. George Wallace defied them. President Kennedy defended America against the extremists. George Wallace is in league with them. President Kennedy fought for legislation that would ensure every citizen the right to vote. George Wallace would repeal it. Robert Kennedy stood for reconciliation between the races. George Wallace stands for division and suppression. He was elected and he runs today on the slogan of segregation forever. My brothers believed in the dignity of man. How can those who stood with them support a man whose agents used cattle prods and dogs against human beings in Alabama? So it is not enough that this movement be defeated. It must be repudiated for the health of our country and our future as a nation. And I hope that the American people will take this opportunity to cleanse the stain of hate from American life.
Senator Kennedy has a right to speak his piece, of course. And Mr. Nixon and Mr. Humphrey and Mr. Agnew and Mr. Muskie and the President have asked the people to repudiate us. But this is a matter for the people, and I'm sorry that Mr. Kennedy feels the way he does, but he has a right to feel that way.
Curtis LeMay told a news conference in East Hartford, Connecticut, that Senator Kennedy has a right to his opinion. And then General LeMay said, "I was always taught that if you can't say anything good about someone, you don't say anything at all." LeMay denied that the American Independent Party is directed by extremist groups. Richard Nixon campaigned through the coal mining fields of eastern Pennsylvania today. In a nationwide radio speech tonight, Nixon accuses Democratic leaders of allowing a gravely serious security gap to develop. Nixon said he would correct what he called failures that could eventually allow the Russians to become militarily stronger than the United States. Hubert Humphrey is campaigning in Southern California today. In a speech to clergymen in Los Angeles, Humphrey said, "Even as we seek peace in Vietnam, we must look beyond. We must stop the deadly race in strategic arms." The vice president said he led the fight to end the testing of nuclear weapons, but he said Richard Nixon had called the nuclear test ban treaty a cruel hoax. Well, the presidential election seems to be tightening up. The latest Gallup poll shows that Hubert Humphrey is rapidly gaining on Richard Nixon in the eastern states. Humphrey now trails Nixon by only 5 percentage points, 43 to 38%. In the previous Gallup poll, Humphrey was 13 percentage points behind, 44 to 31%. The eastern region comprises 12 states and represents 149 electoral college votes. In a moment, a confrontation at Berkeley.
Can this exquisitely proportioned beauty survive? She's about to be tormented. Watch. 27 tons of sand and rock will crash down on our beauty. We're talking about the elegant new ballpoint pen from Bic, the refillable Click. Can the Click survive? We'll soon know. Dare we look? Yes, the sleek finish gleams. Retracting mechanism works perfectly, but will write. Like all Bics, the new Click writes first time, every time. Its diamite ball never fails. Carry it proudly.
Pick up a beauty today. The new Big Click. Refillable. 8 delicious colors. Very expensive. 49 cents each. You'd be silly to spend more for any pen.
What is now called student unrest at the University of California's Berkeley campus has gone into its 4th day. There were new protest rallies today after last night's confrontation with police. ABC's Steve Huss reports.
A small administrative building, Moses Hall, was seized late yesterday by 76 students who sat in and liberated the building, as they called it. From above, they directed barricade building efforts by supporters to keep themselves inside and to keep police out. Construction panels were torn down and burned into the evening hours as the outside crowd grew. Fires illuminated dancers whose gyrations and rhythmic music turned the once serious protest into a near festive symbolic war dance. The original intent, getting credit for a philosophy course on racism taught by Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver, seemed lost. Indeed, it seemed even more lost as police arrived in the early morning. The students had wanted a confrontation with police, a physical one. They taunted police, calling them pigs, and demanding the officers get off campus. Then police moved, and so did the crowd. 500 officers from all over Northern California herded the rock-throwing protesters away from their barricaded friends. One policeman lost his front teeth when hit by a thrown rock. Others were less seriously injured. One of the few injured demonstrators, furious at the confrontation, looked seriously injured as he continued to taunt the police. Actually, it was his bloodied hand which touched his head that had made things seem more serious. Police were quick in surmounting the final objective, those students who were locked inside. An informal booking process marked the end of the protest. Today, other protesting students around campus called for an end to violence for the time being. Most of their leaders are in jail. In all, 76 who wanted to be arrested rather than work out their grievances over the conference table. Steve Huss, ABC, Berkeley.
In Washington, the President's Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence is continuing public hearings. Yesterday, a leader of the student protest movement said one reason for student frustration is that, in his words, the law serves power. Well, today the commission heard about the frustrations and problems of policemen from those who know best. ABC's Irv Chapman reports.
First, one expert witness today suggested policemen must acquire a more sympathetic attitude toward the human problems on their beat. Then John Harrington, national president of the Federation of Police, was a graphic exemplar of some of the attitudes today.
These riots are not riots. A riot, and I've been a long time in the police department and in many riots. A riot is where words and stones are thrown by a couple hundred people at the policeman. Eventually there's enough police power that can be accumulated to take care of the situation, and the situation is ended. But when you have thousands of people on one side that are shooting at police on the other side, and you have not enough policemen in your community. You don't have enough when you call in the state police, that you have to call in the militia. You might as well call it what it is. It's a revolution.
Policeman Harrington complained eloquently about the felons with long criminal records freed on bail every day to commit another violent crime. Irv Chapman, ABC News, Washington.
The House Committee on Un-American Activities recommended today that misbehavior before a congressional committee be made a federal offense. Last month, the committee faced a variety of demonstrations from student leaders when it held hearings on the street violence in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention. Next, some remarkable films taken by the Apollo 7 astronauts in space.
A fine day to be snug inside, and a fine time to discover the wonderfully smooth, rich, and mellow flavor of coffee with Coffee Mate, the non-dairy coffee creaming discovery from Carnation. Coffee Mate needs no refrigeration. Only 11 calories in a level teaspoon. Try Coffee Mate yourself. It makes coffee taste smoother, richer, mellower.
He needs the big dog food. With big protein to keep him healthy, big taste to keep him happy. Friskies Mix the big dog food. Big protein, big taste. Big package, only the price is small. Friskies Mix the big dog food from Carnation.
That's why you been sticking so close, isn't it? This is all you...
Men's fashions have taken a turn for the brighter. They've created a new man. And for the new man, Rob Lee introduces the new shoe. A bold new boot, strapped and buckled. Brawny leather with a blast of brass. The squared-off look with European accents. Rob Lee, the new shoe for the new man.
To handsome Hal Martin, glamorous model Sheila Smith was just another photogenic face. Then, one day, Sheila took up with life-stride shoes.
Sheila, you're moving.
How about that?
With her next life strides,
Sheila, would you pose in a wedding gown?
What have I done to deserve this?
will life stride shoes ruin Sheila Smith's career? Well, where there's life stride, there's hope.
At Cape Kennedy today, the Apollo 7 astronauts, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham, talked over space matters with the crew of Apollo 8, the men who were slated to fly a mission around the moon, probably about Christmas time. The space agency has released films made by the Apollo 7 crew during their remarkably successful 11-day orbit of the Earth. ABC science editor Jules Bergman reports.
This is Apollo 7's rendezvous with its burned-out second-stage rocket 140 miles over Hawaii. With astronaut Wally Schirra at the controls, fellow astronaut Walt Cunningham records it all with a movie camera. The panels open at the top would normally house the lunar module or lunar bug in which 2 U.S. astronauts are due to land on the moon. Over the United States, a simulated docking with the empty rocket. Schirra powers Apollo 7 in as close as 70 feet. While no lunar bug was flown on Apollo 7, the docking proved that Apollo can rescue the 2 astronauts aboard a lunar bug that might be stranded around the moon. It went perfectly. Then Schirra fired up Apollo's rocket thrusters, flying under and safely away from the booster. And now Apollo moves back in again, station keeping or flying close formation with the rocket over almost the entire United States. The booster measures 22 by 60 feet and looks impressively big close up. While the 2 orbited along together, the Gulf Coast and parts of the Gulf of Mexico are in view, then parts of Florida. And finally, the clouds over Florida begin to part, and Cape Kennedy itself comes into view. There it is, 100 miles below Apollo 7, where the 11-day space voyage began. Now the empty booster begins to slowly rotate out of control. The rendezvous and simulated docking, 2 of the major goals, are finished, and Schirra pulls away from the booster, which is now tumbling dangerously.
Apollo 7, an unbelievably successful mission that proved out the Apollo spacecraft in a single flight and has cleared the way for Americans to fly around the moon this December. This is Jules Bergman reporting.
Well, swimming was the big splash at the Olympic Games today. The United States is counting on Don Schollander, the winner of 4 gold medals in Tokyo, to win his first individual medal in Mexico City in the 200-meter freestyle. Today, Schollander swam in a qualifying heat. ABC's Bill Fleming and Murray Rose report.
Don Schollander in lane 7 has a very slight lead over Louis Nicolau, right next to him on his right in lane 8. And in lane 3 is Chance of Holland. Schollander, a good turn, comes out another 2 feet ahead of Louis Nicolau.
Schollander on that last lap rated 36 to Wendon's 54, which is a remarkable difference.
Now we'll see what he pulls coming home and perhaps have an opportunity to count it. The 8 fastest qualifiers will be in the finals coming up tonight, and that will be the final appearance of this great Olympic champion, Don Schollander of Yale University. And a great roar goes up from the crowd as he does his turn and comes back. And Nicolau starts to fade just a little bit. In lane 3, Chance of Holland is in 3rd place.
I think you can see Schollander picking it up very clearly. He's starting to plane over the water. His feet are driving much harder, and he's putting a lot more pressure in his stroke this last lap. This is a very comfortable race for him.
And he touches the wall at 2 minutes flat.
ABC's coverage of the Olympic Games will continue early this evening and again at 10:30, 9:30 Central Time. Every 4 years, the Olympic torch, that bright beacon of international sportsmanship, casts its rays to the 4 corners of the earth. Well, today those beams were reported flickering along the Potomac. ABC's Keith McBee has the story in Washington.
This mile runner is a few miles north of Mexico City. In fact, he's about halfway between Charlottesville, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And he is carrying by relay what a group of wags at the University of Virginia claim is the real Olympic flame. Editors of Rapier, the school daily, say they swiped the flame in Mexico even before the Olympic Games. They carried it to Charlottesville, and they revived it there with a Zippo lighter. The lads allow us how the flame burning in the huge disc in Mexico City that you've seen on television is just a replica. So by relay, they are running it the 100 miles to Washington to present it to the Mexican embassy. Mexican government, of course, is not amused. Spokesmen there say the whole thing is ridiculous, which in a way it is, but it's kind of refreshing. At least these college boys have not seized any buildings. They've not sacked the president's office. And so far as we know, they're not protesting anything. Keith McBee on US 29 in Virginia.
The American broadcasting companies submitted a new proposal to the Federal Communications Commission today. The proposal would allow American television networks to finance their own communication satellite for the broadcast of domestic programming from the East Coast to Hawaii. Under the proposal submitted by Leonard Goldenson, president of ABC, the networks would supply the nation's educational TV stations with free satellite relay service. Bulgaria has begun to move her invasion troops out of Czechoslovakia. Prague Radio made that announcement today. Hungary and Poland already have begun to pull out their troops. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were down nearly 8.5 points. More than 18 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was down 31 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, more than 6 million shares were traded, and the American Exchange Index was down 6 cents. In a moment, commentary by James J. Kilpatrick on the ideal president.
This is a molecular model of poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate. How about that? And I'm Joanna Barnes here to tell you what this unique molecule of Codel polyester fiber means in carpets. It's so special, it's patented.
Every room in your house comes alive because carpets of Codel bounce back beautifully. Even a house full of kids can't keep Codel fiber down. That's why Codel is the fastest growing carpet fiber. If you can't remember the name Codel, ask for poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate.
We also make 2,2,4-trimethyl-1,3-pentane diol monoisobutyrate.
But that doesn't go in carpets.
Codel fiber has bounced back.
count on Codell, a member of the Eastman Kodak family.
Continuing our series of guest commentaries on the ideal president, tonight's syndicated columnist, James J. Kilpatrick, offers his view.
The important thing in a president, it seems to me, is to find a man capable of living constantly in the three dimensions of time. He ought to be soundly grounded in the follies of the past. He ought to have a keen insight into the needs of the here and now. And he ought always to be looking 20 to 30 to 50 years ahead. Such a man would approach questions of law and order, for example, with some profound convictions on the function of government and the nature of a free society. As a philosopher, steeped in the contradictions of human behavior, he would understand the delicate balance that must be maintained between liberty and order. As a man of contemporary action, he would have some ideas for immediate attack upon crime. And at the same time, he would be thinking the long view of what might be done to prevent the 2-year-old of 1969 from becoming the 17-year-old delinquent of 1984. A president must be able to communicate his ideas to Congress and to the people, but he ought not to be one of the boys or pose as a common man. He ought to be an uncommon man, more interested in holding respect than in gaining popularity. And he ought always to reflect the power and the dignity of his office. He ought to have a sense of style, the gift of grace and wit to say the right thing at the right time. He ought also to have a certain hardness, steel nerves, and a steady hand. But this ought to be relieved by compassion and humor and patience. Such a man could govern. Such a man could lead. I'm now in my third week on the campaign trail, and I don't recall having seen any such men lately. But I make no complaint. If we had a perfect president, we critics would be out of a job. With Nixon or with Humphrey, the Republic will survive, and so will we. This is James J. Kilpatrick on the road.
Tomorrow night, guest commentator Bill Moyers will offer his views on the ideal president. I plan to escape from New York tonight to travel for a bit with the presidential candidates. Howard K. Smith will be here tomorrow night. That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Has been a presentation of ABC News. Gymnastics, boxing, swimming, and diving competition are scheduled on ABC Sports Live exclusive Olympic coverage tonight with world record holders Debbie Meyer and Don Schorlander going for new gold medals in the swimming events. See the Olympic Games in color here on ABC.
Supercard is the label to look for.
Happy days are here again. Fill up your glass with beer again. We'll sing a song of cheer again. Follow Sterling back to beer.
There hasn't been this much flavor in beer since vaudeville was king. Sterling's Extra Fist of Barley gives you flavor you can really sink your thirst into. So come on, back to beer.
Once again, the time is here. Enjoy a beer that's really beer. Really bold and wet and cold and clear. Follow Sterling back to beer.
Don't you think you've waited long enough?
When you buy aspirin, do you ever ask the question,
are all aspirin tablets the same?
well, we don't know how carefully cheaper aspirin tablets are made, but we do know St. Joseph Aspirin goes through over 100 quality tests to ensure that St. Joseph Aspirin's quality is the best you can buy. We believe the extra care we take with St. Joseph Aspirin takes extra care of you. Take care of yourself. Take St. Joseph Aspirin.
Proud to...